I was just on a show with somebody earlier today who was trying to argue that this is going to be another, decade long top. Like silver is not going to make a new high for 10 or 20 years. And the same with gold. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, it's all classic, Austrian business cycle theory. We're heading to the crack up boom.
So are you saying that the Bitcoin crowd actually saved the country a little bit?
Then she said, what are your pronouns? I'm like, my pronouns?
We're men. We are men. We are men. We are men.
Hey guys, Ralph here from the Endgame Investor, and I got the great Peter Schiff back on the show. It's been a few years since he was here, and for those who don't know, my first silver purchase, my first significant silver purchase was with Schiff Gold. It was a
Yeah,
bag of
I
junk silver in 2012 for I think the spot was around 26. Maybe I got the coins for a small premium. I think it was like $27. And I was down for like 10 years until recently when everything just blew up in a good way. And now we're in a correction again. So Peter, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, silver did have a huge run. It went from $30 up to about 120 in just a few short months. And now people are scared because it's back around 60. But the key to silver is that it broke through the $50 resistance that had really controlled the market since 1980. And it turned back the 2011 rally. Even when gold almost hit 2000, silver couldn't get back above its 1980 peak. Whereas gold, of course, the 1980 peak was around 850. So gold went through the high. Silver, couldn't until just recently, until earlier this year. And so it's had a significant correction, which has scared a lot of people because, oh, it's down 50%. Yes, but it's still $60 an ounce. So
It's
uh,
also the third
I,
time this has happened since 1980. It's not like silver hasn't done this before. It's done it
well,
before.
actually, it hasn't done something this big. But, I was just on a show with somebody earlier today who was trying to argue that this is going to be another, decade long top. Like silver is not going to make a new high for 10 or 20 years. And the same with gold. I was like, are you kidding me? I mean, look at what's going on with the central banks right now. Look at the $40 trillion national debt. Look at how much the deficits are exploding, the net cost in interest payments, the amount of inflation that's going to be created to monetize this debt in the next 5 to 10 years is going to dwarf all the inflation the Fed has created since its inception in 1913 until today.
Yeah.
So to say that gold and silver prices are just going to stay where they are during
So
all that, while the
so
price
that
of
that's
everything else
the
just goes through the roof.
that's really the topic that I wanted to ask you about personally. I have a little subscription service. I'm a small time guy, nothing compared to you. But I'm more of like a hyper intellectual, and I try to lead people through the theory of what's going on, all this kind of stuff. So what I've been hearing lately from my subscribers is like, Rafi, are you still sure that your thesis is correct? Because did you expect a correction to be this deep and this long? And so I'm pretty sure you've heard that before. Like Peter says, the real crash is here. Peter says the real crash is coming, and the dollar just keeps surviving on and on and on.
Mhm.
So what I said, and I want to hear your take on this and where you would take it, is that look, I don't know exactly what's going to be the domino that falls and topples everything over. Maybe it's Bitcoin, maybe it's Japan, maybe it's a big bank. It could be anything, really. The system is too big for any of us to know for sure. But my thesis is that there's only going to be one more financial crisis. I don't know exactly what's going to
Yeah.
trigger it, but once that happens and the Fed has to print again 4, 5, 6, 7 trillion dollars to rescue whatever the hell it is that they're rescuing, that's going to be it. I don't think the dollar is going to survive it in the way that it has this
Yeah,
next
I
financial crisis. I
agree
think there's going to be
that.
one more and that's it.
Yeah, and I didn't even know that it was going to have the last one. To be honest with you, so it's already on borrowed time. But like I agree, this is an enormous bubble. There are any one of a number of pins that could end up pricking it. We just don't know which one, but it will be one, if not several, it's hard to say, but there's a lot of air that's going to come out. And the fact that it's gotten this big and been inflating for so long means that there's going to be a lot more damage. Um, and it's not just that the damage comes when the bubble pops. The damage has been building up over the years where the bubble's been forming. It's just that when it pops is when the consequences really rear their heads. And the consequences are going to be enormous. And I think that you're right in that this next crisis is not another financial crisis in the sense that we've experienced. It will be a dollar crisis and a sovereign debt crisis. So that takes it to a whole new level. Because if it's a garden variety kind of crisis, the government can bail everybody out because the government can come in and print money and make good on the losses and prop people up and bail them out. But when the government itself is at the center of the crisis, when the confidence is lost in sovereign debt and treasuries, in the US dollar itself, the bailouts don't work. The stimulus doesn't work. It just fuels the fire. So that is where we're headed, where the medicine that we've always relied on not only won't work, but will actually make us sicker. And the reality is it never really worked. It didn't work in the sense that it cured the disease. It just made the symptoms go away for a while. So we can pretend that everything was okay. But during this next crisis, we won't be able to operate under that pretense anymore. And so that's what's going to be so different about it. And then the question is, what's going to happen in the aftermath of the crisis?
Yeah, I'm worried about that too. I also wanted to ask your opinion on that because a lot of people say, well, Rafi, if what you're saying comes true and the dollar either falls by 99% from where it is now, and people who had all of this purchasing power that they imagine they have, suddenly they wake up the next morning and they don't have it.
Yeah.
That's a real societally destabilizing force. Do you think the West or America can survive that kind of upheaval? And what are we doing stacking gold and silver if people are just going to be so desperate they're just going to go out the streets and steal things? I mean, what do you think it's going to look like?
Well, I mean, gold and silver at least will allow you to conveniently store your purchasing power. That's what people are doing. But yeah, I mean, this is going to be a major game changer. And the problem is the way the political parties have been moving in recent years is everybody's shifted left. The Democrats have gone full socialist, right? Where they're not in the closet anymore. They're like, yeah, we're socialists and we admit it, right? And they're proud of it. The Republicans have also moved left. They're left of center. They want big government. They want government to be involved in the economy, to be involved in central planning, to be working in partnership with businesses. They want bigger deficits, more government spending, more money printing by the Fed. And in fact, interestingly enough, J.D. Vance just gave a talk at the Nixon Library, where he was praising Richard Nixon as, hey, he's a great guy and he's making a comeback and who cares about Watergate? And I didn't really care so much about Watergate. I mean, I did, but I care more about the liberal policies that Nixon pursued. And Nixon was the last, or I guess Ford was also cut from that cloth. But back in the day, and a lot of your viewers may not remember this, but back in the 50s, the Eisenhower years and the 60s and the 70s, when you had the big populist movement on the left, that led, with the Kennedy and Johnson, the Republican Party was very left wing. I mean, very, very liberal in that sense. You had a small part led by Barry Goldwater,
Yeah.
that was conservative. The rest of them were associated with the Rockefeller wing, kind of like Democrat light. Goldwater, initially tried to, won over the Republican Party in the 1960s.
Yeah, but he lost
Unexpectedly.
big. He lost big in the general election. No, that's
Yeah, but he won, and he wasn't expected to win, but he gained a lot of popularity within the Republican Party. And he got the nomination in 1964. And of course, he lost in a landslide because the public was not quite ready for that message. But in 1980, they were. After Johnson, and then Nixon and Carter, the public had enough of government from both the Republicans and the Democrats. And that message, that Goldwater message, finally resonated with the general public through a Reagan. And Reagan was a better communicator than Goldwater. I mean, Goldwater was a great man, but Reagan was able to deliver that Goldwater message in a way that Goldwater couldn't.
well, interestingly, Peter, let me just interject for a second, then continue on this line. Isn't it interesting that Reagan captured the attention of the country almost precisely when the dollar was collapsing and gold was reaching its 1980 apex? That's when he was the most popular. That's when he got
Yes,
elected.
because inflation was a problem, and we had the misery index, high interest rates, high inflation. And at that point, the public was like, yep, I blame government because Ronald Reagan said, government isn't the solution, government is the problem.
Government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem.
And he had a great personality. He was, an actor. So he knew how to act in front of a camera, and he was passionate about his beliefs, right? And so that was great. But here we are now. The Republican Party has moved back to the Rockefeller days, where they have more in common with Nixon than Reagan. And the Democrats are all the way left, even left of where McGovern was, or where Humphrey were. I mean, the guys that we got now, the AOCs and stuff like Bernie Sanders.
Yeah,
and,
they're certifiably nuts, but yeah, it's a different
so
thing.
so we're way left. So the problem is we're now going to get this big, big crisis, way worse than anything we've experienced. And you're going to have the Democrats, especially if it blows up before Trump finishes this term, right? That's, you're going to have the Democrats saying, we told you so, capitalism doesn't work. We need to completely overhaul our entire system, and redo it in a socialist, communist kind of, mold, because capitalism destroyed us, right? And then the Republicans are going to have to somehow defend capitalism, even though they helped to destroy it. But they're already very left, and they're going to want big government programs too. So, the question is, can we do what we did in 1980? Can we recognize the true source of our problems, central planning, central banking, and that we need less government, right? Like the people in Argentina, and they elected Milei. Now, it took a long time for the Argentine voter to be as disappointed and as frustrated in government to finally take a chance on capitalism. But it was after years and years of broken government promises and abject failure. So I don't know, what it's going to be like in the U.S. But, what I am trying my best, and I'm doing interviews like I'm doing your interview, and I'm doing all kinds of interviews, and I do my own podcasts, so that people will know that when this happens, why it happened, and that the politicians that are telling you that they're the salvation are your damnation. They're the ones that created the problem. Just like I warned about the 2008 financial crisis, and, somebody made that Peter Schiff was right video, and a lot of people saw that. Hopefully, I'm going to create a much bigger record and influence even more people so that they understand that I'm right again. And the stakes are a lot bigger now, as far as, not giving into the temptation to go all in on socialism and to reject it completely and to allow capitalism to solve these problems because the problems are solvable if we get the government out of the way. And it doesn't mean they're solvable immediately without any pain. They're not. There will be pain for certain people. Certain people may get immediate relief. It kind of depends on where you are. But at the end of the day, the entire country will be better off if we do the right thing, which is go down the road of free market capitalism and start dismantling all the government that we've created over the years and return to sound money and get rid of all the Fed and the central bank money printing. But, we've been living in this fantasy for decades now. The transformation to reality is gonna be a little bit rough. Now, maybe AI will ease the pain. We'll see. There's a lot of potential there for increased productivity from artificial intelligence and robotics. We'll see.
Well, going back to the Reagan topic, in Kola Kavod Ronald Reagan, with all due respect to Ronald Reagan, he spoke very, very well. The dollar barely survived on the strength of Volcker, not really Reagan. And despite his rhetoric, he really started the heavy spending by trying to spend the USSR into the ground. And, mainstream historians would say, oh, that's what really won the Cold War. And thanks to Reagan, we won the Cold War because of all the spending. But then, the Austro-libertarian historical school will say the opposite, and that Ronald Reagan was really a disaster because, clothed in libertarian language, he really grew government spending, which ended up where we are today. And I think where the difference is, I'm not saying I wouldn't have voted for Reagan. I would have voted for whoever was, I forgot who was running against him, Adlai Stevenson. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. Whatever. I would have voted for Reagan anyway because who else am I going to vote for? But where we are today is that unlike in the Reagan years where the dollar survived because of Volcker, the dollar's not going to survive that same way. And so we're not going to be able to have the government spending. So whatever a leader of the US or the free world or whatever a country has, he's going to have no choice but to shrink government because there's not going to be anything to spend.
Yep.
I mean, I hope we get a leader not necessarily driven by the policy of I'm not going to spend because we have to save money, but given that we're bankrupt, this is going back to Milei. This is exactly what Milei said. Like, he took a chainsaw. He's like, there is no money. We have no money. There's nothing to spend. I can't spend anything.
No hay plata.
Because
we
the
problem is, and I think Milei sent Donald Trump like a chainsaw, like a toy chainsaw or something, but Trump didn't use it. Trump made government bigger. That's the problem. He championed the big, beautiful bill, and that's a tax hike in disguise because it made government bigger and more expensive. And we got to pay for that. Doesn't matter if they lowered taxes on tips or lowered taxes on overtime or Social Security. Waiters and waitresses are going to pay higher prices for everything because of the big, beautiful bill. We're going to pay the inflation tax. There's no free lunch here. And, what we needed was spending cuts. And instead, we got spending hikes.
Well, if we get spending cuts under the current system, then the banks collapse because if debt doesn't expand exponentially, then eventually it infects the banks like it did in 2008. And then you have a choice. You can either bail them out and continue the system as it did, which is what they did in 2008, which is why we are here now, or you just let them collapse and then you start over.
A lot of the people who receive government money use that government money to pay back banks interest on their loans and stuff like that. So the whole system is being perpetuated by government. It's all a debt-based, consumption-fueled bubble. I mean, you've got, Mises on your bookshelf right there. I mean, it's all classic, Austrian business cycle theory. We're heading to the crack up boom. But the malinvestments that have built up over the decades are enormous. Trump points to them, like the trade deficit is a reflection of those malinvestments. But the trade deficit in and of itself isn't the problem. It's what produced it that's the problem. The trade deficit is the consequence of the problem. Yeah. And, he tried to attack the trade deficit with tariffs. It's not going to work. It didn't work because the problem isn't the deficits. That is the manifestation of the problem. The problem is we don't invest enough. We don't save enough. We don't have enough capital, expenditures. We consume too much. We borrow too much. And all this can be traced to artificially low interest rates. And so we need higher interest rates. but we can't get higher interest rates without bankrupting all the people that are in debt. And therefore, the people who loaned the money are now going to have to write down the value of the loans because they're going to have to acknowledge that the loans are no good. So in order to avoid dealing with the unpleasant reality, we just keep blowing more air into the bubble.
So I wanted to switch topics here a little bit to what you were talking on your last show, and I wasn't even aware of this. I talk about the pyramid that starts with gold and goes up layer by layer by layer, ultimately to Bitcoin. I just want to reiterate it here. That it's not really Extra's pyramid, but it's all a derivative layer pyramid that starts with gold, and then dollar was originated as a derivative of gold. It was a receipt for a certain amount of gold. On top of that, you have bank deposits, which is a promise for paper dollars. On top of deposits, you have a promise for dollars, which is debt or treasuries. On top of that, you have everything that treasuries are based on all the other debt, and it keeps going until you get to Bitcoin.
Yeah, but
right?
originally the dollar wasn't a promise to pay gold. The dollar was gold. The dollar was defined by a weight of gold. That's actually what it was. Federal Reserve notes originally were promises to pay dollars. They were notes for dollars. The Fed had the dollars, the gold coins, and it issued notes that were redeemable in those gold coins. That's why, like, if you had a $20 bill, it said payable to bearer on demand, $20 in gold.
Right.
The note, and that's why it's called a note, right? A Federal Reserve note is a liability of the Fed. The Fed has made a promise to pay something. Well, what are they going to pay? They're going to pay dollars. The dollars are gold. The dollars are silver. And so that's our money. Then when, of course, we went off the gold standard, we transformed a note to pay dollars and said, well, that's going to be the dollar now. The IOU for the dollar becomes the dollar. It's like you go and check your coat at a restaurant, and they give you a piece of paper and you give them your coat. And then when you go back to get your coat, instead of giving you your coat back, they just give you your claim check back and say, that's your coat now. That's what that's what you got.
Yeah.
But you can't wear it warm. It's not a real coat. It was an IOU for a coat, but maybe somebody stole the coat, so they don't have it anymore. So they just give back your claim check. So that's what the Fed did. Hey, we're not going to give you the gold, but you can keep the claim check.
Yeah. So
IOU nothing.
So when we get to that point, right, and we're all the way up on this derivative pyramid, and we finally get to Bitcoin, which isn't even a thing, it doesn't even exist. I didn't know that strategy which you were talking about in your last show had a derivative of a derivative of Bitcoin on its own balance sheet or on its own business plan or whatever it was. Stretch. I had never even heard of that. That strategy basically is going to store Bitcoin and then borrow against it to pay shareholders dividends through a preferred thing where it's going to borrow money that it's already borrowing to buy Bitcoin, which is already a derivative of Bitcoin, which is like all the way in the stratosphere of the pyramid. So what's his name? Michael Saylor. He's been sailing away for a while now. He has all of these. He has all of these derivatives of Bitcoin that he's going to have to deal with very soon. And this could, just like any other thing that could prick the bubble, this I think is big enough to do it. I mean, what's Bitcoin's market cap now? Like $2 trillion, and all the debt on top of that. We don't even know how much it is.
I don't even think it's 2 trillion. I think it's 2 trillion with all the other cryptos. That's the total. I think Bitcoin itself is a little over 1 trillion, like 1.2 trillion or something like that. Then you have to throw in Ethereum and all the rest to get to 2 trillion. But it's 2 trillion worth of air. I mean, it's just on paper. It's just BS. And a strategy which is now going to be the biggest seller of Bitcoin, which was the biggest buyer. Strategy spent $60 billion buying Bitcoin. Now it's going to be the biggest seller. That's going to, prick this bubble if it hasn't. I think it's already been pricked, but now it's got a bigger hole in it. And he's going to get inundated with lawsuits too, from people who bought those securities based on the material false statements and misrepresentations that Saylor made as the executive chairman of Strategy, basically telling people that very risky assets were safe and they had nothing to worry about. They bought them and they lost. And so there's a lot of lawsuits too. And that's not going to be good for the brand, for the image of Bitcoin when Saylor is the face of it. And of course, to satisfy these lawsuits, whether they're settled or they're just lost, uh, strategy is going to have to sell Bitcoin because that's its only asset, really.
Yeah, and then the question is, what about all the other banks? I remember I have this vision of I saw it of Howard Lutnick at some kind of Bitcoin conference talking about how much Bitcoin whatever bank he was in charge of has. He's like, we got a beep load of Bitcoin. He was proud of it. He was cheering him. I mean, there's a lot of banks that have all this stuff or some derivative of it. And
Mhm.
if Bitcoin goes down to some level, I mean, these banks are going to start bleeding and they might ask for bailouts themselves, and then it might bleed into the AI. Like how many people have mortgaged their Bitcoin to buy AI funds
Yeah,
or these
there's a
who
lot of
knows?
leverage in Bitcoin, and I think a lot of that is going to blow up when Bitcoin is maybe 30,000. I forget where a lot of these loans will be under collateralized, and the borrowers will need to sell. Um, but the main reason Wall Street, or the only reason Wall Street got involved in crypto, they were very skeptical, just like me, right? They thought it was bullshit. But once it got to the point where it was big enough where they can make money off of it, then all of a sudden they believed in it. Now they didn't really believe in it. They just saw an opportunity to make money. And they made a ton of money on these Bitcoin ETFs. They were the most profitable, I mean, the most successful ETF launches in history. So Wall Street generated a lot of fees for itself, basically doing nothing. Um, and a lot of banking fees. I mean, Saylor was probably the biggest customer on Wall Street, constantly selling stock and paying commissions, paying underwriting fees on the preferreds, and a lot of other crypto. All these crypto, treasury companies. Wall Street got rich off of these companies. Of course, the customers got broke, buying the stocks, but they're like a casino. They're booking the bets, making the vig, right? And so that's how Ludnick. And then what happened was in the 2024 election cycle, crypto bought that presidency. I mean, they may be the main reason that Trump got elected. They supplied a lot of money and a lot of votes. And the payback was all the hype that allowed them to sell their Bitcoin at a profit. You wonder, how is it that Bitcoin is lower now than it was when Donald Trump was elected, even though we've had all this hype from Trump and his family and Congress to pump up Bitcoin? Why isn't the price higher? And that's because while all of the general public was buying based on the hype, the insiders that bought the election were busy selling. That's how pump and dumps work. The pumpers are the dumpers.
Yeah. Wait, so a funny thought just occurred to me, and we'll close with this. I wanted to twist your words kind of humorously for a second, see how you respond to it. So you're saying that you have a theory that the Bitcoin crowd helped Donald Trump get elected. And as far as I'm concerned, I didn't want to get too far into politics here, but if it was Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris, and to me the most important, I was a single issue. I have a lot of issues, but I voted for Trump, or I would have voted for Trump. I'm in Florida and I don't live in the country, so I just said forget it. But I would have voted for Trump. Um, the biggest issue for me was gender reassignment surgery. I was like, this has to stop for kids. That's the number one thing, and then everything else after that. So for that reason alone, Trump has saved a lot of children. And the counter-cultural revolution that he sort of represents is a lot better than anything we would have had under Kamala Harris. So are you saying that the Bitcoin crowd actually saved the country a little bit?
Well, I don't know if I'd say saved it, because Trump may end up condemning it once the Democrats get back in power. But they may have, on the margin, in a lot of these swing states, because a lot of young people that normally would vote Democrat also were in Bitcoin, and so they may have gone Republican. And a lot of money came in, and that money is important. It buys advertising and stuff like that. So it's hard to say. I mean, there was a number of factors, but Trump was a good politician. He really pandered to the Bitcoin crowd. Um, you know, um, uh, Robert Kennedy did that same thing. He got a lot of Bitcoin support. Then he threw his support to Trump. So he played that well. He dangled the Bitcoin strategic reserve in front of voters. And so there were voters that voted for Trump just because they thought it would make the Bitcoin that they owned go up. But I agree with you on the counterculture. I mean, that was a good thing that Trump did to push back against that political correctness, that nonsense. I joke. I was calling to make a doctor's appointment, like as a new doctor, and I'm on the phone with them, and the lady asked me, "I got to ask you this because I can't assume it, but what is your gender?" And I said, "Well, I'm what I sound like." And she said, "Well, what is that?" I said, "Well, I'm a man." And then the next question was, okay, what was your gender at birth? And I was like, really? I said, yeah, I need to know. I said, well, I was born a man.
Man. Oh, what? A man? Kind of a man.
And then I'm not making this up. Then she said, what is your gender identity now? And I was like, well, I'm a man. I was born a man. I am a man. I identify as a man. Like,
We are men. We are men. We are men.
like she had to ask me all, and then as if even after all those questions, and I was still kind of frustrated from like wasting my time trying to explain that I'm a man, right? Then she said, "What are your pronouns?" I'm like, "My pronouns?"
Who cares? He's man. Yes.
Well,
Now I'm a man, and now you want to know what my pronouns are? I mean, it's just so like it's still going like this, right? Donald Trump pushed back against that, men and women's sports, right? Men beating up women in a boxing ring. I mean, it's getting ridiculous. So yes, I mean, he was able to do like I remember I got so much hate in whatever year it was, 2020, 2022, whatever. I have on X, I have like the most commented on, reposted post that was Twitter, before Elon Musk took over.
Mhm.
I had over 50 million impressions on this thing, but it had, I forget how many comments. It was all over the place because I said that Zelensky should wear a suit when he addresses Congress, not a t-shirt, right? And it was like, this is blasphemy. How could you say something like that? Well, when Donald Trump became president, he did the same thing. He said, you want to talk to me, you wear a suit. You're not coming to the White House in a t-shirt, right? And so it's the same thing. But now all of a sudden he was able to use the presidency to push back against this bullshit coming from the left. That was really hostage to, this gender mafia and this radical left. But the problem is, though, the economic policies are horrible that the Trump administration has pursued. And now, on top of all that, he started a war with Iran. What the hell did he do that for? And that is not only did he break his promise with the voters, so he's a hypocrite there. And it was a dumb war that we basically lost, right? Like Vietnam. We're going to end up spending hundreds of billions, God knows, maybe $1 trillion on Iran now and all this. But it's helped create more anti-Semitism. I mean, there's been a big rise in anti-Semitism, which hits home. I'm Jewish, but now you got people blaming the Jews for the war, and the Jews for high gas prices and everything. And now it's like, this is bad stuff because that's the last thing we needed was to help legitimize this anti-Semitism.
Well, without the Jews, the Americans would never have had nuclear weapons to win World War II. So there's that. I mean, the answer. I mean,
what was that?
I'm also
Our Jews
Jewish.
are smarter than your Jews.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I live in Israel. I'm pretty Jewish. So is the guy behind me. That guy.
Yeah.
And what I say to people, it's like, well, you say the Jews are responsible. I say, well, the Jews are just everywhere behind the scenes in all kinds of historical developments. We're always there. So we're always going to be noticed wherever we are, whatever we're doing, and we better not be doing the wrong thing or we're going to get hit. And that's what I'm worried about now.
Yeah. I mean, we're a very small percentage of the population, but we do a lot of things, good and bad. I mean, look at all the Nobel Prizes that have gone to Jews. I mean, it's just, I forget the percentage, but it's enormous relative to the population. So yeah, I mean, they achieve a lot, and they do good things, they do bad things, but it's not because they're Jews. And the average Jew is not doing anything, right? They're just surviving like everybody else. They're just part of the middle class or the upper middle class, or there's even some. I'm sure that there's poor Jews too. They're just trying to get by and raise their family and feed their kids. But they make a convenient scapegoat. That's the problem. Politicians are always looking for scapegoats. They're always looking for somebody or something to blame the problems that they cause on. And it worked great in Germany. The Jews made a great scapegoat there.
Mr. and Mrs. Livingston, we have kidnapped your son. Pay $100,000 or he dies. Signed, the Jews. It's the Jews, Martin. They're gonna want more than $100,000.
My guess is it's not going to get that bad here, but you don't like it when you start to see a country swinging in that direction.
Yeah.
Look.
Yeah. I try to stay calm about it, and that's why I live here and not the United States. One of the reasons I live in Israel, not in the United States. Not that I'm afraid of a pogrom any second, but I see the West crumbling because of the money printing, and I dread to think what's going to happen when the dollar does collapse and they come after us. Mm-hmm. And
Yeah.
I see it coming, and I'm hunkering down over here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, good luck over there.
Yeah. Good luck in Puerto Rico.
I'm in Connecticut today, but yeah, I
Connecticut.
spend most of my time in Puerto Rico.
Okay. Well, wherever we end up on the other side of this, I'm sure the Jews will help rebuild, or the good ones like you and me, or we like to think of ourselves that way. We'll do the best we can and see where we can come out on the other side of this end game, and hopefully it won't be too bad.
Yeah. All right. Well, take care.
You too. Thanks for coming on.
All right. And don't forget, for people listening to my podcast, I do my own podcast once or twice a week, schiffradio.com, on my YouTube channel. Good to subscribe there. And follow me on X. I talk about X. I've got over 1.5 million followers now. It's growing a few thousand a day. So I'm trying to spread the word through social media. But also I'm on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. I mean, I'm trying to reach the people wherever the people are and get the message of truth out there, freedom, liberty, capitalism, and try to push back against this socialist narrative that's spreading through both political parties in the United States.
All the links will be in the description below. Thanks, Peter, so much. And
right.
And I'm looking forward to seeing you on whatever interview you're doing next.
All right. Take care.